Every single Glashutte Original is a unique work of art. In the finishing department, watch movements receive their beautiful traditional surface finishing. Glashutte ribbing. The machine created in the company's own toolmaking department applies this decoration to bridges, cocks and automatic rotors, as seen here. To apply traditional perlage, the base plate is rotated in small steps by an experienced hand. After every step, a rotating rubber peg coated with diamond powder is pushed down on the surface with even amounts of pressure, leaving a beautiful circular pattern behind. This is done by hand to ensure that every base plate remains unique with its own special nuances. The sunburst decoration applied by a single-toothed miller and a rotating diamond-coated chisel is especially radiant. This lavish decoration was already introduced to watchmaking in 1868. Hand engraving is and remains the non plus ultra of finishing. The art of the engraver is to cut a pattern into bridges and cocks without first drawing on a ready-made pattern. The engraver only applies enough pressure and removes as much material that the piece is not damaged and the technical functions are not influenced. Every movement in our Manufactory is a unique piece due to the loving engraving and decorating that is done by hand. For this gear train bridge from caliber 46, an engraver needs at least 2 entire days. Only very few watch manufacturers afford themselves an in-house galvanic department. Glashutte Original belongs to this elite circle. During this work-intensive process, the plates, rotors and even the hand-engraved cocks are refined with a coating of gold or rhodium. The parts are first nickel-plated in the baths, an essential step to securing a lasting gold coating. Only after this is the gold plating applied. Now the delicate recesses of the engraving are filled out with a protective lacquer under a microscope. The ensuing rhodium plating process gives the cock its shiny silvery color. After the lacquer coating is removed, the engraving shines in gold. While the flat parts of the movement are being finished, rotationally symmetrical components are created in the company's turning department. It is part of Glashutte Original's philosophy to make even the smallest of the company's own stems, pinions, pegs and screws. The manufactured parts are so tiny most of the time that they must be collected by a fine sieve. The smallest of the screws manufactured here has a head diameter of only 0.4 millimeters, a thread of 0.3 millimeters and a slit of 0.1 millimeters. In the toothing department, the sometimes microscopically tiny individual parts are worked and perfected by hand. This is how spring barrels, pinions and toothed wheels are created. On the bearing pivots of the rotating movement parts, only minuscule tolerances are allowed. Therefore, the pivots must be fitted to the drillings in the jewels using a process called burnishing. This type of grinding sees that the pivots are turned between 2 hard metal discs. Thus, the surface of the pivot is condensed, made more resistant to wear and tear, and its tolerance is improved to a maximum of 0.003 of a millimeter. Naturally, intense examination follows on the profile projector. The celebrated quality of Glashutte Original's watches is no coincidence. The hardening department is where steel components get their resistance to wear and tear. The parts are first treated thermally and then cooled in an oil bath by shock. The tempering that follows in a vacuum oven sees that the parts do not become porous and retain their necessary springiness. Examining their degree of hardness is done with a diamond. These parts have passed the test and now proceed to the next station. The first little functional units are now created in the subgroup assembly. They will later be part of the entire manufacture caliber. Enormous experience and an absolute feel for the material is demanded here. Under the microscope, 18 tiny weighted screws with a thread of 0.35 millimeters are screwed into the balance wheel. The screwdriver used to do this is again a special tool from the company's own toolmaking department. After being riveted to the balance staff and having the plateau added, the balance must now be pushed. In doing so, the underside of the balance wheel gets a little groove milled into it, the strength of which depends on the size of the imbalance. After that, the balance and balance spring must be classified according to their oscillation behavior so that they can be optimally paired. Only then is the balance spring added and sent to a thorough final inspection before going off to assembly. The riveting of the steel wheel stems and their pinions to their spur gears is what creates toothed wheels. The wheels are tested here for truth in the round. To do this, one needs a little puff of air, a practiced eye, and, above all, a steady hand. For automatic watches, completion of the ball bearings and assembly of the rotor also takes place in the subgroup assembly. First, 7 balls are positioned and the bearing added, and the ball bearing pressed into the rotor plate. Now the rotor plate is added to the 21-carat gold oscillating weight. The two-tone rotor embellishes the back of the movement and serves to automatically wind the mainspring. The union of aesthetic demands and an obligation to Glashutte's history is especially tangible in the polishing department. Tourbillon cage, index and swan neck springs seen here are brought to a high polish using a traditional tin polishing process. This is done using a tin baton with diamond powder and evenly moving it across the surface. A process that can easily take up to half an hour for a swan neck spring. For other components, such as a filigreed tourbillon cage, this can even take up to several hours. When beveling edges, as here on a 3/4 plate, Glashutte Originals watchmakers use a traditional process. This makes it possible to file the edges to exactly 45 degrees in all positions, with the material becoming denser along its outer edges. The special tool used for this is once again an in-house design.